Ready, set, secure.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us again for another episode of Inside the Mind of a Hacker. In the first part of our emerging phishing tactics video, we discussed different ways that real-world attackers are bypassing host-based protection controls and egress controls with malware that's introduced via phishing attacks. In this portion of the video, we're going to talk about the more email-specific controls, specifically file type blacklists that are on the email gateway and ways that sandbox file analysis are bypassed by attackers. It's also relatively easy to bypass blacklists for malicious file types on email gateways. First of all, blacklists are inherently problematic because of the fact that it requires you to know all of the potential bad file extensions and file types that could be out there. But even if and when those can't be bypassed, that still doesn't stop the bad guys, because most of your malicious exploits these days are actually done using quote-unquote good files, such as Office document macros, formula injection. Recently, we saw tons of malware in the past couple years with the DDE, or Dynamic Data Exchange, code execution before Microsoft patched that. Malformed documents that trigger exploits in the underlying operating system. Or remote retrieval of malicious code using legitimate channels. There are also a lot of ways that you can bypass the next generation sandbox analysis capabilities. And the most common and effective way to do this is actually to have conditional execution. And what I mean by this is to create ways in which the malware can determine whether or not it's being analyzed, and if so, it doesn't execute. So one thing that we can do is, within our code, we can look for indicators that it is being run in a sandbox. A common example is looking at the time zone. UTC time zone is commonly used on virtual machines and on sandbox environments. Maybe looking at the number of processes, because these systems generally are not used as intensively as actual user workstations. Looking for time acceleration, as many of these systems will attempt to speed up the time in order to make sure that it executes the full sequence of the executable. Another thing that we can do is look for the absence of indicators that it actually is running on the target environment. So if we are attempting to exploit, we'll say once again, Bob's Hardware, and we know what Bob's Hardware's internal domain is, we can query the system to see if that's the actual domain that the payload is being run on. And if it isn't, then we don't execute the malicious part of the code. Another way is just requiring additional user interaction that would be intuitive to a user, but not necessarily to a machine that's attempting to execute the system. Now here's an example of a relatively sophisticated malicious attachment that could be used in a phishing email. Notice that it's topical and relevant, and it appeals to people's concerns with the COVID-19 threat. And it also has what appears to be an embedded document of a PDF. But the reality is, whenever somebody clicks on this and executes it, it does a remote retrieval of a payload and executes it in memory. Now, this is effective for multiple reasons. One, the additional user interaction required by clicking that link is something that can't be emulated by most sandboxes. So that allows it to bypass those sandbox controls. It also bypasses the common file type blacklists for incoming emails, because it was sent as just a Word document and the actual payload is pulled in later at runtime. We can bypass the egress controls by carefully crafting the external domain that it's sent to and getting one that already has an established reputation. And this also can bypass most endpoint controls, because it uses native Windows protocols in order to retrieve the remote file and also executes the payload in memory. So as you can see, most of the controls that exist in order to protect a user from malicious attachments in emails can be bypassed in one way or another. And ultimately, there is no silver bullet. There is no perfect security control that is going to address all of your concerns. So ultimately, the best approach that you can possibly take is a layered security approach, to implement multiple different layers of security controls to block different types of attacks. Now, even doing this inherently doesn't fix your problem, because there are right ways and wrong ways to do layered security. Obviously, if you have 10 different controls, but they're all blocking the same things and they're all missing the same things, then that isn't an effective control stack. What you want is a control stack where each control within the given ecosystem effectively complements the others. The attacks that are missed by one are effectively caught by one of the others, So this is where it is absolutely critical to do control stack optimization. And that is evaluate each of your different controls, both detective and preventative, against all of the potential different incoming attacks, the different tactics, techniques, and procedures that are used by cyber adversaries to make sure that you do have sufficient coverage, obviously not by one control, but at least by some of the controls in your environment for every single one of those different types of techniques.